Every afternoon, a single dad waited at the same quiet bus stop to pick up his daughter. But day after day, he began to notice another little girl, always sitting alone, always silent, and always crying. At first, he thought maybe it wasn't his place to ask. But one afternoon, he followed her. Before we begin, if you believe in the power of kindness, second chances, and stories that touch the heart, make sure to subscribe. Your support helps us keep sharing meaningful stories like this one. Now let's begin. A single dad saw a girl crying next to his daughter every day. Then one afternoon, he followed her. Ethan Miller adjusted the strap of his oil-stained canvas satchel as he leaned against the rusting guardrail at the corner of Maple and 3rd. The late autumn wind curled through the empty street like a sigh, whispering through the brittle branches of the trees lining the sidewalk. Across from him, the yellow school bus rounded the bend, its headlights glowing against the encroaching dusk. He glanced down at his watch, 3:48 p.m., exactly on schedule. After a 10-hour shift at Ridgeline Auto and Machine, his bones ached, and his hands were still smeared with grease that no amount of soap could fully scrub out. But this part of the day, the moment his daughter stepped off the bus and wrapped her arms around his waist, this was what kept him going. The bus hissed to a stop. Its doors creaked open with the kind of tired groan only machinery with stories to tell could make. Sophie was the second to last, off her backpack, bouncing behind her cheeks red from the wind. She smiled wide when she saw him and ran straight into his arms. "Hey, kiddo," Ethan murmured into her hair, the scent of crayons and peanut butter wafting up to meet him. "Hi, Dad," she beamed, and then pulled back her face, clouding a little as she looked over her shoulder. "Lena's still on the bus." Ethan followed her gaze. There she was, the girl who always sat in the 3rd row back on the driver's side. Always alone, always quiet. Lena Carter. Today she stood hesitantly at the top of the steps, her oversized hoodie hanging off her small frame like a curtain. Her eyes were downcast, her arms hugged tightly around her chest, and for a brief second, Ethan saw a tear sliding silently down her cheek. She stepped off the bus without a word, turning in the opposite direction from Sophie and Ethan, her pace brisk, almost panicked. "Does she always walk home by herself?" Ethan asked, brows furrowing as he watched the girl disappear around the corner. Sophie nodded, still staring after her. "Yeah. She lives on Cedar, I think. She never talks much. Some kids say she used to live in Chicago, like in one of the bad parts. She ever say anything to you? No. One time I asked if she wanted to sit with me, but she just shook her head. She kinda always looks scared, like something's chasing her." Ethan's gaze lingered on the empty sidewalk. He didn't know Lena, not really. But there was something in her walk, in the way her shoulders caved in toward herself, in the way she flinched every time a car passed too close, that gnawed at him. It was a look he'd seen before, in the rearview mirror years ago. In his own eyes. "I think she cries every day," Sophie said suddenly. Her voice had gone soft. "On the bus. She always waits until most kids are off, then she turns her face to the window and cries really quiet." Ethan exhaled his breath, visible in the chill. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took Sophie's backpack, slung it over his shoulder, and reached for her hand. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get home." They walked down the sidewalk toward their modest rental, a one-story weather-worn house with an old Chevy parked out front and a wind chime that hadn't rung since spring. The silence stretched between them, but Ethan could tell Sophie was still thinking about Lena. So was he. That night after dinner, and dishes after Sophie's homework was spread out like confetti across the kitchen table, Ethan found himself staring out the front window. His calloused fingers drummed absently against the frame. What did he know about Lena? Only that she was quiet, always alone. and that something in her expression haunted him. He didn't want to overthink it. Kids cried. Adolescence was a minefield of hormones and heartbreak. But deep down, his gut, seasoned by hardship, single fatherhood, and hard-earned instinct, was telling him this was different. At bedtime, Sophie stood at the door to her room, hugging her favorite stuffed elephant. "Dad, yeah, you'll keep an eye on her, right?" Ethan turned to look at his daughter. "I mean, not in a weird way," she clarified quickly, then frowned. "Just, I think she needs someone to notice." Ethan walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'll pay attention. I promise." Sophie nodded and slipped inside, closing the door behind her. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Ethan lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, his mind replaying Lena's face over and over again. The tear, the slumped shoulders, the way she didn't look back. By morning, he'd made a silent decision. He wasn't going to ignore it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. Either way, someone had to notice. And he would. He just didn't know yet how deep the darkness ran, or how close to home it would strike. The next afternoon, the bus wheezed to a stop in the same spot as always, Maple and 3rd, just beyond the bent street sign and faded crosswalk. The early November sky was overcast, gray and low, like a blanket pressed down over the neighborhood. The clouds held the kind of weight that suggested something was about to break. Ethan stood with his hands tucked into the pockets of his mechanic's jacket, watching as the yellow bus shuddered to a halt. Sophie was first off this time, her knit hat askew and cheeks pink from the cold. She clutched her sketchbook to her chest, eyes scanning behind her before she even greeted him. "She's not here," she said. Ethan's brows drew together. Lena Sophie nodded, glancing back toward the still open bus door. A few kids filed off in their usual cliques and clusters, giggling and pushing, but no one walked with a hoodie pulled tight or eyes to the ground. "She wasn't at lunch today either," Sophie added as they turned to walk. "Some kid said she got in trouble yesterday and had to stay after class, but I don't think that's true." "Why not?" "Because she's not the kind of kid who breaks rules. She's more like the kind that disappears." Ethan didn't respond right away. Sophie wasn't dramatic. She was observant, painfully so. He'd raised her to notice things, patterns, changes in voice, shadows where light should be. You couldn't raise a child on your own without giving them some of the armor you'd earned along the way. They walked the 2 blocks home in silence, Ethan's mind already turning gears. He didn't like guessing, and he especially didn't like feeling helpless. When they reached the porch, he paused before unlocking the door. "You said she cries on the bus?" he asked, keeping his tone even. Every day, Sophie nodded as she took off her backpack. "Pretty much. Not loudly. She waits. Usually until we're the only ones left. Then she leans against the window and pretends she's just tired. But I can see it in the reflection." Ethan let out a slow breath. "Has she ever said anything to you or anyone she talks to? No one, Dad? Not even teachers?" "I think she wants to disappear." He held the door open for her, but his eyes lingered on the street. Somewhere out there, Lena Carter had gone home yesterday. Or maybe not. The thought sat heavy in his chest. Later that evening, after Sophie had gone to bed and the small house settled into its nightly rhythm of soft ticking clocks and distant street sounds, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee going cold in his hand. The soft glow of the stove clock read 10:17 p.m. He picked up his phone thumb, hovering over his contact list. He scrolled past old co-workers, a couple of emergency numbers, and finally stopped at Amelia Jacobs, Sophie's homeroom. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if calling a teacher at this hour was overstepping, but then hit dial. The phone rang twice before a sleepy voice answered. "Hello, Miss Jacobs. It's Ethan Miller, Sophie's dad." There was a beat of pause before her tone warmed slightly. "Oh. Yes, of course." Is everything all right? I'm sorry to call this late. I wanted to ask about a student. Lena Carter. The line went quiet. I know she's not mine to worry about, Ethan continued. But Sophie's been talking about her. Says she's always crying on the bus. Today she wasn't at school. There was a rustle as if Amelia were sitting up in bed. I noticed that too. She didn't show up this morning. No call from a parent. I even checked with the front office. Ethan's jaw tightened. What's her home situation like, if you don't mind me asking? Amelia sighed. It's complicated. She lives with her stepfather, Marcus Carter. Her mother passed away earlier this year, car accident. Since then, Lena's withdrawn. She doesn't participate, doesn't speak unless spoken to. She's excused herself to the nurse's office more than any other student this semester. Often complains of nausea, headaches. Has anyone talked to child services? I've raised concerns. But without proof of abuse, it's hard to trigger anything actionable. The principal thinks she's just grieving. Ethan muttered a quiet curse. I know, Amelia said, voice low. But it's not nothing. Kids like her don't just fade like that unless something or someone is pushing them toward the edge. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. Is there a number for the stepfather? I can email it to you. I'm not sure what you're planning, Mr. Miller, but please, be careful. This isn't the first time I've felt something was off, and I've seen people get shut down hard trying to help. Thanks, Amelia. Really, I'll let you get some sleep. After they hung up, Ethan sat in the still kitchen, the weight of her words tightening in his chest. He looked across the hall toward Sophie's room. Her door was cracked open, a sliver just enough to see the edge of her nightlight casting soft blue shadows. He had no legal authority, no right to intervene. But he was a father, a man who'd raised his child with a sixth sense for silence and bruises that didn't show. Something was wrong, and tomorrow he would find out just how wrong. The next day broke with an icy drizzle that coated everything in a slick sheen, turning sidewalks into danger zones and windshields into canvas for streaking wipers. Ethan stood beneath the awning of Ridgeline Auto, his thermos in one hand, watching the neighborhood school bus roll to a slow stop 2 blocks down. It was just past 3:45 p.m. He'd clocked out early under the pretense of a headache, though his manager didn't question it. Ethan wasn't known to slack. He was known for tightening bolts twice and triple-checking brake lines, the kind of man who didn't speak unless it mattered. And right now, something mattered. From his post, he watched the usual students climb down one by one, jackets zipped tight, chatter muffled by the wind. Sophie was third off. She scanned the bus steps, her lips pressed into a thin line. Ethan met her halfway down the block. She's not here again, Sophie said before he could ask. That's 3 days now, he replied quietly. Sophie adjusted her backpack strap, frowning. Dad. Do you think something happened to her? Ethan didn't answer. Not directly. But his silence was enough. They were halfway home when a movement across the street caught Sophie's eye. She tugged at his sleeve. Look. A girl, a flash of gray hoodie, dark hair clinging to wet cheeks, was moving hurriedly through the strip mall across the avenue, ducking between the pharmacy and the laundromat. Even from a distance, Ethan recognized the posture, the frantic edge to her movements. Lena. Stay here, he told Sophie, voice calm but firm. Wait by Mrs. Patel's shop. He jogged across the road, careful not to draw attention. The air was sharp and damp, his boots clicking faintly on the wet pavement. Lena had just pushed open the door of Pine Ridge Pharmacy. A narrow bell chimed overhead. Ethan waited a beat, then followed. The warmth inside was jarring after the chill. The store was mostly empty, just an elderly man browsing nasal sprays and a teenage clerk hunched behind the counter, scrolling on his phone. Ethan spotted Lena at the back, standing before a shelf of personal hygiene products. She looked pale, as if she hadn't slept in days. Her arms were wrapped around her stomach. She shifted uncomfortably, then reached for something. Her hand hovered over the pregnancy tests. She didn't see him yet. Ethan froze. He should leave. This wasn't his place. Not really. But then she dropped the box. It hit the linoleum with a hollow plastic clatter. Her hands trembled as she bent to pick it up. "Lena," he said quietly. She turned with a jolt, eyes wide. A second later, panic washed over her features. What are you doing here? I was nearby," he said, keeping his tone level. "I saw you. I was worried." "I'm fine. You don't look fine." "That's none of your business," she snapped. But it lacked conviction. Her voice cracked. Ethan took a step closer. "Look, I know I'm just Sophie's dad. I don't want to scare you. But you've been crying for days. You're not at school. And now you're here alone." Lena clenched the box in her hands. Her fingers went white. "You don't know anything." "Maybe not," he said softly. "But I know when someone looks like they're carrying something too heavy. And I know what it's like to be a kid, hoping anyone might see it." She flinched, eyes darting past him toward the store window. A black sedan had just pulled into the lot. Its tires cut sharply against the wet asphalt. She paled. "I have to go," she whispered. "Lena, he's here," she hissed, stepping back. Ethan turned in time to see a tall man in a navy raincoat step out of the car. He moved with an easy, confident gait. His face was hard to see through the rain, but the posture was unmistakable, calculated, controlled. Marcus Carter. Lena turned sharply and darted down the adjacent aisle. Ethan followed with just enough space between them to not spook her. "Don't let him see you with me," she said, low and urgent. He gets mean when people talk to me." "What does he do, Lena?" Ethan asked. But she didn't answer. She shoved the box of pills back onto the shelf and took off through the rear emergency exit, pushing it open despite the alarm chirp. Ethan followed her out into the rain-drenched alley just in time to see her duck behind the dumpster. He didn't chase. Instead, he stood at the alley entrance, watching Marcus enter the store. A beat passed, 2 beats. Then Marcus came out again, empty-handed, scanning the lot. His expression was tight, jaw clenched. He opened the sedan door but paused. His gaze turned toward the alley, toward Ethan. Their eyes met. For a moment, it was as if the wind itself stilled. Then Marcus gave a tight nod, impersonal. Professional. A man who believed he'd seen nothing worth remembering. He climbed into the car and drove away. Ethan remained rooted to the sidewalk until the taillights vanished. Behind him, Lena stepped from the shadows. "I can't go home tonight," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan turned to her, his heart pounding. He didn't move toward her, didn't speak right away. Because he knew this was the moment, the edge of a decision, the place where a man had to choose between what was legal and what was right. "You won't," he said finally. "Not alone." And in that simple sentence, the course of both their lives began to shift. The rain hadn't let up by the time Ethan pulled into his driveway. His old Chevy sputtered once before falling into a low, throaty idle. The wipers dragged across the windshield with tired resolve, carving arcs in the haze. In the passenger seat, Lena sat still, motionless, silent. Her hoodie was soaked through, and strands of dark hair clung to her cheek. She hadn't said a word since they'd left the pharmacy. Not even when Ethan offered her a towel from the glove compartment. Not when he called Sophie to let her know everything was okay. Not even when he drove past her house without asking for an address. He glanced sideways now, engine running. "You're safe here," he said gently. "I meant what I said. You're not alone." Lena didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on her knees, hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Ethan let the silence sit. He'd learned a long time ago that some things couldn't be coaxed. They had to be allowed to surface in their own time, like oil rising through dirty water. Finally, she spoke. "He doesn't hit me." Her voice was flat, but Ethan caught the tremor beneath it. "That's good," he said cautiously. "But it's still bad," she added, then fell silent again. Ethan killed the engine. The house looked like 100 others in the neighborhood, single-story weathered siding porch light, flickering faintly in the rain. Sophie waited at the front door, arms crossed against the cold, her eyes widening when she saw who stepped out of the car beside her father. Lena flinched at the sound, like she hadn't expected to be recognized. But Sophie stepped forward without hesitation. "Come inside," she said. "You're soaked." Lena hesitated, her shoes sinking slightly into the muddy gravel. Then she followed, ducking into the warm light of the house as Ethan shut the car door behind them. Inside, the heat from the old furnace grown to life. Ethan handed Lena a clean sweatshirt, Sophie's a faded blue hoodie with a cracked print of a cartoon whale on the front, and set a pair of dry socks by the heater to warm. He didn't ask her anything. Not yet. In the kitchen, he stirred a pot of canned soup and listened to the girls speak in low voices in the living room. Sophie didn't press. She just offered presents like Ethan had taught her. That night, Lena ate little, barely half a bowl, and declined a shower. But she allowed Ethan to set up the couch for her with clean sheets and a heavy quilt. When he dimmed the lights, she finally whispered something so low, he almost missed it. "Thank you." He nodded. "Anytime." After Sophie was tucked in and the house fell quiet, Ethan returned to the kitchen. He stood there for a long time, staring at the cheap laminate countertops, his jaw working slowly. Then he picked up the phone and called Amelia Jacobs. She answered on the third ring, voice hushed. "Ethan, I have Lena," he said. A beat of stunned silence. Then, "What do you mean?" "She didn't want to go home. She showed up alone at a pharmacy this afternoon. Looked like she was about to collapse. Marcus Carter came looking for her." "My God." "She asked me not to take her back." "I didn't." "Did she tell you anything?" "Not clearly. But she's scared. That much is obvious. And based on what I saw, I don't think he's just some overbearing guardian." Amelia's voice lowered further. "There's only so much I can do without triggering district protocols. Can you contact someone at Child Protective Services? Quietly, I'll try," she said. "Tomorrow morning. But you need to be careful, Ethan. Harboring her even with good intentions puts you at risk. Legally." "I know." There was a pause. "Do you trust me, Amelia, yes? Then believe me when I say this girl isn't safe in that house." Later that night, Ethan sat in the armchair across from the couch, arms crossed, boots still on. He watched over Lena, who lay facing the wall, curled beneath the quilt, like a shadow trying to disappear. He didn't expect to sleep. He didn't need to. At 2:13 a.m., her breathing shifted. Not the rhythm of sleep, but the unsteady cadence of someone fighting it. "I know you're awake," he said quietly. A pause. Then softly, "Yeah." Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You don't have to tell me everything. But I want you to know. When my daughter was 6, I took her and left a place that wasn't safe. I know what it feels like to pack in the middle of the night and pretend it's just a sleepover." He heard her inhale sharply, then slowly exhale. "I didn't think anyone would notice," she whispered. Ethan didn't respond. He let the moment breathe. Then trembling Lena spoke. "It started a few months after my mom died. At first he was just around, controlling. He wouldn't let me go out, wouldn't let me talk to anyone. But then he started coming into my room at night. Ethan's stomach turned, but he kept his voice steady. Did you tell anyone I tried? My aunt. She didn't believe me. She said I was making things up, that I was jealous of him and the new baby. But I wasn't. I was just scared. Tears had begun to form in the corner of her eyes. I bought pills, she said. I didn't know what kind to get. Just something to stop anything from happening. Ethan felt an ache so deep in his chest, it made him press his palm flat against it. You did the best you could, he said softly. You survived. She turned to face him, then eyes red-rimmed and raw. I didn't want to be a problem. I just wanted someone to see. I see you, Ethan said. And he meant it with every ounce of who he was. Tomorrow would bring authorities questions, maybe even threats. But tonight, under his roof, Lena Carter was no longer invisible. She was a child, and she was finally safe. It wasn't the kind of detail most people would have noticed a single missing passenger on a routine school bus route. But Ethan noticed. The following afternoon, he stood beneath the same tree near the stop sign at Maple and Third Hands, buried deep in the pockets of his worn jacket. The air was sharp and still heavy with that strange tension that sometimes settled over a quiet neighborhood. Like fog you couldn't see but could feel in your bones. The school bus rounded the corner right on schedule, groaning to a stop brake's hissing. Sophie was among the first to step off. She didn't smile. Ethan immediately knew something was wrong. Lena's not on the bus, Sophie said before her boots even hit the pavement. She wasn't at school at all. His chest tightened. Did the teacher say anything? Sophie shook her head. Nobody knew. A few kids said she transferred, but I don't believe that. Miss Jacobs looked worried too. She kept checking the door all day. Ethan nodded, jaw-tight gaze, already drifting toward the east, toward the strip of businesses near Pine Ridge Avenue. He hadn't slept much the night before, and now a familiar unease slithered through his spine. He could feel it again. The silence. The weight of something not said. He took Sophie's hand as they started walking. Let's drop your backpack at home. I need to check something. 15 minutes later, Ethan found himself parked across the street from the small liquor store on Cedar, a grimy, low-lit corner shop that he rarely noticed before wedged between a payday loan outlet and a defunct laundromat. The sign buzzed weakly and the window open. He hadn't known Marcus Carter worked here, but he knew it now. He watched from the car, his fingers tapping slow and rhythmic on the steering wheel. The storefront's glass was tinted, but he could make out movement, one figure behind the counter and then another. Thin shoulders, hoodie pulled up. Lena. Ethan sat up straighter. She emerged through the side door a moment later, clutching her stomach with one arm, her other hand pressed against the wall for balance. Her pace was slow, almost dragging. Something was wrong worse than before. She looked gray beneath the street lamp, her eyes glassy. Ethan's heart pounded. He exited the car and called her name low and careful. Lena. She flinched and stopped mid-step. When she saw him, her expression flickered between relief and fear. You can't be here, she whispered. Why aren't you at school? She shook her head. Please, I need to get back before he... But she didn't finish. Instead, she doubled over beside the trash bin and vomited violently into the gutter. Ethan rushed forward and knelt beside her, steadying her as her knees gave out. Her skin was cold, her body trembling. Lena, what's happening? He asked urgently. Before she could answer, the side door creaked open behind them. Ethan turned. Marcus stood framed in the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. His face was expressionless, but his eyes were sharp, assessing. What's going on here? Marcus asked. Ethan rose to his feet. She's sick. She's fine, Marcus replied coolly. She just needs rest. It's been a rough few days. I think she needs a doctor. That's not your concern. Lena slowly stood wiping her mouth with the sleeve of her hoodie. It's okay, she mumbled, her voice hollow. He's right. No, he isn't. Ethan said firmly, his tone quiet but hardening. This isn't normal. You're throwing up. You're scared out of your mind. And now you're missing school. Marcus took a step forward. Look, I understand you're trying to help. But Lena is my responsibility. Her mother left her in my care. You're a stranger. You don't get to insert yourself into our family business. Ethan stood his ground. If she's not in school tomorrow, I'm calling the district. And if I see one more sign that she's in danger, I'm calling the police. For the first time, Marcus's mask cracked. His eyes narrowed, jaw flexing. You want to make this messy, Mr. Miller. I'm not trying to make anything. But I won't look the other way. Marcus glanced at Lena, who still stood between them, swaying slightly. Get in the car, he told her. Lena didn't move. I said I'll walk, she whispered. Marcus took a breath, calming himself. Suit yourself. He turned and walked back inside, letting the door slam behind him. Ethan turned to Lena. Do you have anywhere safe to go? She didn't answer. Just shook her head, the motion barely perceptible. He gave her his phone. Text your teacher. Tell her you're with me. She'll know what to do. Lena hesitated, then slowly tapped out a message with trembling fingers. When she finished, she handed the phone back. She said she's calling a social worker. She told me not to go home. Then you won't, Ethan said. They started walking the neon lights from the storefronts, casting their long shadows across the rain-slick sidewalk. As they turned the corner, Ethan glanced back once. The store was still the windows dim. But he knew this wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The next morning, the sky broke open over Willow Creek, like a basin tipped too far gray rain, pouring in thick, icy sheets, drumming against Ethan's windshield, in a rhythm that matched the unease rising in his chest. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, eyes shifting between the road ahead and the passenger mirror. Every turn, every corner, every car behind him felt off. He was being followed. He was sure of it now. It started after he dropped Sophie at school. A black SUV, late model, tinted windows, pulled out of the grocery store lot behind him, and had been lingering too long, hanging back, just far enough to not draw attention, but never too far to lose sight. 3 left turns, 2 stops at red lights, and it was still there. Ethan knew how to spot a tail. You don't spend a decade as a mechanic without learning how people hide or stalk. Beside him, Lena sat hunched in her borrowed coat, the hood pulled low. She hadn't said much since last night. The nausea came and went in waves, her skin still pale, her voice no louder than a breath. She held a thermos of ginger tea in her lap, both hands wrapped tightly around it, like she was afraid to let go. I think he knows, she said quietly. Ethan didn't ask who. I didn't go home. I didn't answer his texts. He probably thinks I ran away again. Again. The word sat heavy between them. Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror. The SUV was gone. No, there it was, parked across from a hardware store, now engine idling, watching. He turned left away from his usual route home. Lena looked at him. Where are we going? Somewhere public. Ethan replied. And somewhere he won't expect. They ended up in the parking lot of the public library just after opening hours. The lot was mostly empty, 1 librarian's car, a weather-beaten pickup, and an old minivan. Ethan parked near the building facing the entrance. Stay here, he said. He climbed out into the cold drizzle, walked slowly around the truck. then slipped between two parked vehicles and doubled back toward the street. The SUV was there again, 2 blocks down, engine still running. He couldn't see the driver, but he didn't need to. The message was clear: I'm watching you. Ethan pulled out his phone and called Amelia Jacobs. I need help, he said without preamble. Now. 10 minutes later, they sat in a quiet reading room on the 2nd floor of the library. Books lined the walls, and the sound of rain played gently on the windows. Amelia arrived with a man in a brown blazer, lean, sharp-eyed, and calm as a lake. He introduced himself as Carl Wexler, a child welfare investigator with the county. Ethan shook his hand with measured strength. I've already reviewed Ms. Jacobs's report, Carl said, setting down a thin folder. But I'd like to hear everything from your perspective, Mr. Miller. Everything you've witnessed since you became involved. Ethan nodded. He started from the beginning. Maple and 3rd Lena crying on the bus, the slipped blister pack of pills, the late-night visit to the pharmacy. He recounted Marcus Carter's cold stare, the controlling tone, and the empty, practiced smiles. Carl listened without interrupting his pen, scratching lightly against the folder, and Lena, Carl asked softly, turning toward her, Do you feel safe right now? Lena's voice was almost inaudible. With him, no. Do you believe Marcus Carter has harmed you in any way? She hesitated. Her fingers dug into the sleeves of her coat. Yes, she whispered. Not like bruises. But he comes into my room. Late. When he thinks I'm asleep. Carl's expression didn't change, but the silence grew thicker. He scribbled a note, then looked up. Has he ever threatened you? He said if I told anyone, he'd tell the police I was unstable, that I ran away to be with some boy, that they'd put me in a home, and that if my mom were still alive, she'd hate me. Ethan's hand curled into a fist beneath the table. Carl nodded. Thank you, Lena. You were very brave. He turned to Ethan. Mr. Miller, I'm placing Lena in temporary protective custody, effective immediately. She will not return to that home. Marcus Carter will be contacted. Do you have a secure address she can remain at for the next 24 hours? Yes, Ethan said without hesitation. My place. Carl nodded, standing. You may be contacted by law enforcement. There will be questions. Stay honest, stay calm, and keep her close. Ethan stood, then offered his hand again. Thank you. Carl gave a small, grim smile. Thank you. Most people don't get involved. You did. That night, as the rain softened into a mist, Ethan sat on the porch with a mug of coffee watching the street. Sophie was inside with Lena, showing her how to play an old board game they'd found in the closet. For the first time, Lena had laughed quietly, but unmistakably. A patrol car rolled past, slow and deliberate. Back up. Ethan exhaled. He hadn't realized how long he'd been holding his breath. The front door creaked open behind him. You okay? Lena asked. Ethan turned, surprised to see her there. She wore Sophie's hoodie again, a size too big, and socks that kept slipping down her heels. But her eyes were clearer now. Better now, he said honestly. She stepped out onto the porch and stood beside him, both of them looking into the night. Do you think he'll try to come here? She asked. If he does, Ethan said, his voice steady, he'll have to come through me. Lena nodded. I used to wish someone would say that. You never had to wish, he replied gently. You just needed someone to mean it. And for the first time, Lena believed someone did. It was just after 4 the next afternoon when Ethan spotted the sedan. The same black car from the liquor store, same tinted windows, same silent presence. It sat across the street from the garage like it belonged there, engine off, windows reflecting the clouded sky, idle and unbothered. But Ethan knew better. He'd seen it one too many times now. Someone wasn't just watching. Someone was waiting. He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped out from under the awning, pretending to inspect the tire rack. From this angle, he could see the silhouette of a figure in the driver's seat, motionless, waiting, like a spider in its web. He returned inside, nodded at Mike to cover the last 2 jobs of the day, then grabbed his jacket. On the way out, he called Amelia. "Has anything happened with Marcus Carter?" A pause. "His home is under quiet observation," she said. "The police made initial contact this morning. He wasn't home." Ethan clenched the phone tighter. "Then I think I just found him." "You're sure?" "No. But I have a hunch he's trying to figure out where Lena is." "Be careful, Ethan. He's already crossed lines, but he's not stupid." "If he feels cornered," I know Ethan interrupted. "That's why I'm not waiting." By 5:30, he was parked down the street from Willow Glen Elementary. Sophie and Lena were expected out any minute. The rain had stopped, but the wind had picked up swirling leaves across the cracked pavement like whispers. Ethan kept the engine running. At exactly 5:38, the girls stepped out of the after-school building. Lena looked better still, cautious, still quiet, but there was color in her cheeks now, a bit of light behind her eyes. Sophie waved when she saw him. That light dimmed the moment Lena spotted the black sedan idling at the end of the block. Her steps slowed. "He's here," she murmured as she climbed into the car, her voice flat and fearful. Ethan didn't turn his head. He simply said, "Then we won't go home." They drove east past the limits of their familiar streets and into the rural edge of town, where the street lamps thinned and the pines thickened, where barns sagged behind fences and dusk settled early. Ethan kept one eye on the rearview mirror the whole time. The sedan followed. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Ethan made a sharp left onto a gravel road that led into the County Park Lakeside Reserve. The entrance was quiet, the gate opened, the area nearly empty, aside from a maintenance truck parked near the ranger shack. He pulled into a space at the far end of the lot near a cluster of trees and the path to the lakeside picnic grounds. The sedan pulled in 3 rows back, staying in the shadows. Lena stared at the dashboard, breathing shallow. Ethan turned to her. "You still trust me?" She nodded. "Then we stay smart. And we stay together." He called Amelia again, brief and urgent. "We're being followed. I'm at Lakeside Reserve. Marcus is here." "I'm calling 911 now," she said. "Keep your distance. Do not confront him." Ethan ended the call and checked his surroundings. The park was sparsely populated, a couple pushing a stroller near the lake, a teenager throwing a ball for a golden retriever. Ordinary people on ordinary afternoons. Except this wasn't ordinary. "Come on," Ethan said to the girls. "We're going to walk. Stay between me and the lake." They moved across the gravel down the footpath toward a grove of trees that wrapped around a maintenance shed. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth. Ethan's senses were on fire. Every crack of a twig behind them made his shoulders tighten. Behind them, the sedan's door opened. Marcus stepped out. He didn't call out, didn't raise his voice. He simply followed. Ethan led the girls behind the shed and motioned for them to crouch down, out of view. He pulled out his phone, heart hammering. 1 minute. 2. The shed door creaked open. Marcus entered. Ethan leaned forward, using the slats in the side wall to peer through. Inside, Marcus was speaking low and fast to someone. 2 other men were there, strangers, rough-looking older. One leaned against a workbench, the other paced. This wasn't a coincidence. It was planned. Then Lena's name passed Marcus's lips. Ethan strained to hear. "You know what happens if she talks." "If anyone talks," Marcus was saying. "She wasn't supposed to run. She's scared now. We need to finish this." Ethan's stomach dropped. He backed away and dialed the police. "This is Ethan Miller. I'm at Lakeside Reserve Maintenance Shed on the Eastern Loop. A minor is being targeted. 3 adult males inside. 1 is a known predator. The others are unknown. Send units now." The dispatcher's voice came back calm but firm. "Units en route. ETA 6 minutes." "Can you confirm the minor is not inside the structure she's with me?" Ethan said. "She's safe, for now." He hung up and crouched beside Lena. "They're here for you," he whispered. "They brought people." Lena trembled. "What are they going to do?" "Nothing," Ethan said. "Not while I'm here." Then he rose, stepped into the open, and walked toward the shed. Marcus spotted him first. His face changed, surprise, then rage. "You don't belong here," he said. Ethan's voice was steady. "She's not yours to control anymore." Marcus stepped forward. "You have no idea what you're interfering with." Ethan didn't flinch. "I don't need to. I've seen enough." Behind Marcus, one of the other men moved toward the door, but stopped as the first siren pierced the quiet. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees seconds later. Marcus turned, panic flickering behind his eyes. "Get out of here," he barked. The other men bolted through the back exit. Marcus hesitated too long. 3 squad cars surrounded the lot within seconds. Officers emerged with weapons drawn, voices firm. "Hands where we can see them." Marcus raised his hands slowly, seething. As the officers moved in to detain him, Ethan stepped back toward the trees, toward the girls. Sophie reached for his hand. Lena stared at him, eyes wide, disbelieving. "You came," she whispered. Ethan looked down at her, heart still pounding. Always. The rain had finally stopped by the time Ethan pulled into the hospital lot that evening. The night sky above Willow Creek was bruised with clouds, the full moon barely visible behind their shifting veil. The asphalt still shimmered with puddles reflecting the emergency room lights in broken patches. He parked beneath the overhang and turned off the engine. In the back seat, Lena had curled against Sophie's shoulder, half asleep, but still clutching the hoodie sleeve in her hand. Sophie kept her other arm around her, gently rocking with the rhythm of the truck's idle. Neither had spoken much since the officers took Marcus Carter away. The images of the confrontation in the woods of squad cars and shouting still echoed in their minds like distant thunder. Inside the waiting room smelled of antiseptic and tired linoleum. A nurse behind the glass window recognized Lena from an earlier visit with child services and waved them forward. "We've been expecting her," she said kindly. They were ushered into a private examination room, one clearly set aside for cases like this, soft lighting, warm-colored walls, and a hand-painted mural of balloons on the far side, an almost patronizing attempt to soften the clinical edges. The doctor, a tall woman with graying hair and eyes like polished steel, introduced herself as Dr. Mason. She crouched beside Lena's chair rather than standing over her, and her voice was soft, careful. "Lena, I'm going to ask you a few questions, okay? You can say as much or as little as you want." Lena nodded, her eyes barely lifting from the floor. "Has anyone touched you in ways that made you uncomfortable?" A long silence. Then a whisper, "Yes." Dr. Mason didn't flinch. She nodded, took notes, asked more questions when, how often, where. Lena's answers were short, fragile. Ethan stood with his back to the wall, fists clenched in his jacket pockets, his jaw aching from how tightly he was grinding it. Sophie sat quietly, watching with wide, horrified eyes. Finally, Dr. Mason rose and stepped into the hallway to speak with the attending nurse. The door clicked softly behind her. Lena looked up, blinking. "Did I do something wrong?" Ethan knelt beside her. "No, sweetheart. You did something brave. I thought, if I told, maybe they'd say I was lying, like before." He gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "That's not going to happen this time. You've got people listening now. You're not invisible anymore." She looked at him, eyes full of disbelief that was slowly beginning to fade. An hour later, Dr. Mason returned with a clipboard and a weary expression. She's physically okay, aside from exhaustion and some warning signs of anemia, she told Ethan privately just outside the room. No major injuries. We've taken evidence, documented everything for the case. She'll need a follow-up appointment, possibly counseling. Ethan nodded. Dr. Mason studied him. She trusts you. I didn't ask for it, he said. But I won't waste it. You've done more for her in 3 days than some family does in a lifetime. That hit harder than he expected. She continued. CPS will place her into temporary foster care while the investigation proceeds. But given the circumstances and your connection to her and Sophie, you may qualify to become her emergency caregiver. Ethan blinked. You mean she could stay with us, only if you're willing? The words landed like a stone in a still pond. He hadn't planned for this, hadn't imagined being a father to anyone but Sophie. And yet, when he looked through the glass at the girl inside that room curled in his daughter's hoodie, he couldn't imagine letting her go back to any life that didn't include being protected. I'm willing, he said. It was nearly midnight by the time they left the hospital. Lena was quiet in the back seat, staring out at the wet parking lot. Sophie had fallen asleep, her head resting against the window. As Ethan pulled out onto the road, his phone buzzed on the dashboard. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Mr. Miller, a voice asked, crisp and low. Yes, this is Detective Rosa Navarro, Willow County PD. I'm overseeing the Marcus Carter case. I've just finished interviewing him and wanted to update you directly. Ethan felt his grip tighten on the steering wheel. Go ahead. Carter is denying all charges. Claims Lena fabricated everything, that you manipulated her. He's also claiming custody rights and is attempting to block CPS involvement. Ethan exhaled sharply. You believe him? No, Navarro replied flatly. His story is inconsistent, and we've already matched some of Lena's statements to evidence recovered from his house and the shed. But cases like this take time. There will be hearings, court battles. You need to be prepared for that. I'll be ready. She's lucky to have you, Mr. Miller. Ethan looked in the rearview mirror. Lena had fallen asleep at last, her face tilted toward the window, peaceful for the first time in days. I'm lucky to have her, he said quietly. Back home, Ethan carried Sophie to bed, while Lena changed into dry clothes. The living room was still warm from the earlier fire, and a soft jazz record played in the background, something calming, something without words. When he came back out, Lena stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the dark street. Do you think he'll come back? She asked. Ethan stepped beside her. Not if I have anything to say about it. She didn't respond right away. Then softly, thank you. For what? For staying. He looked at her and saw a kind of strength beginning to rebuild, slowly, carefully, like a new foundation rising from rubble. You're not alone anymore, he said. And you never will be again. Outside the night deepened, but inside for the first time, it felt like morning. The courtroom smelled like old paper and disinfectant, a sterile kind of anxiety that clung to the walls and hovered just under the humming fluorescence. Lena sat beside Ethan at the back, small in a chair that seemed too large for her hands clutched tight in her lap. She wore a navy sweater of Sophie's sleeves pulled over her wrists. Her eyes rarely left the floor. They were only there to observe. No testimony today. No confrontation. Just a motion to suspend Marcus Carter's custody rights pending investigation. But still, Lena's knuckles were white. At the front of the room, Judge Donovan, silver-haired and measured, looked over her glasses at the attorneys before her. I've reviewed the preliminary CPS report, the officer's statements, and the hospital findings. Given the severity of the allegations and the material collected, I find sufficient grounds to proceed with the emergency order. Ethan could feel Lena's breath hitch beside him. The judge continued, effective immediately. Marcus Carter's custody of Lena Carter is revoked. The child will remain in state care or an approved temporary placement while further investigation proceeds. A soft murmur spread through the room. The words landed like thunder in Lena's chest, final, irreversible, strange. For so long, the ideas of freedom had been abstract. Now it had paperwork. Now it was real. Afterward, they walked out into the wind-lashed parking lot, and Lena tilted her head toward the sky. No rain, no clouds, just sun. For the first time in what felt like years, she didn't flinch when it touched her face. Later that afternoon, a quiet knock at Ethan's door pulled him from the kitchen. He opened it to find a tall woman in a pea coat, holding a folder, her ID badge glinting in the porch light. Behind her stood a boy in a striped polo and an elderly woman in a cardigan. "Mr. Miller," the woman asked. "Yes, I'm Patricia Klein from CPS. This is Lena's maternal grandmother, Eleanor Graves." Lena stepped into the entryway behind Ethan, eyes wide. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the old woman stepped forward, hands shaking. "My God," Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking. "You look just like your mother." Lena froze. Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak. Then she took a cautious step forward. "I thought you didn't want me." "I didn't know," Eleanor said, her voice raw. "After your mother died, Marcus told the family you'd moved to Michigan to live with cousins. He told us." She stopped herself, breathing hard. "He lied," Lena said. "I know that now." They stood inches apart, two people separated by years of silence and a wall of lies. Then slowly, Lena reached out. Eleanor took her hand in both of hers. "Can I hug you?" the old woman asked. Lena nodded. It wasn't the kind of hug that cracked bones or knocked you breathless. It was trembling and hesitant, the kind that carried a question in it. The kind that asked, "Is it too late to start over? I want to get to know you." Eleanor whispered. "But only if you want that too." Lena leaned in, eyes closed. "I think I do." That night, Ethan sat with Lena on the porch steps. The fireflies were out, blinking like distant memories across the grass. Sophie was inside, humming to herself as she colored at the kitchen table. "You okay?" Ethan asked. Lena nodded. "It's weird, all of it. Like I'm waking up from something and the world's not the same shape anymore." "That's normal," he said. "I don't know what happens next." "Neither do I," he admitted. "But I know this: what happened to you doesn't get to decide who you become. You do." She looked at him, uncertain. "You really believe that?" "Yeah," he said. "Because I've lived it. When Sophie's mom left, I didn't think I could raise her alone. Thought I'd fail her. But every day she gave me one more reason to stay upright. She made me better." He looked at Lena, meeting her gaze fully now. "And so have you." A long silence passed. Then tentatively she asked, "Can I stay just a little longer?" Ethan felt his chest tighten. "You can stay as long as you need." She leaned her head against his arm. "I don't want to run anymore." "You don't have to." Hours later, after both girls had gone to bed, Ethan stood in the hallway outside their rooms, arms crossed, listening to the soft rhythm of breath behind each closed door. He'd walked into Lena's life by accident, but he was staying on purpose. Some wounds don't vanish with time. Some never fully close. But with enough kindness, enough presence, they scar over. They heal unevenly, imperfectly, but they heal. And tonight, in a quiet house under a safe roof, one child had started to heal. So had he. The sun had barely risen when Ethan's phone buzzed on the nightstand. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes and reached for it, expecting an early garage call. But the caller ID read, Detective Rosa Navarro. He sat up immediately. Mr. Miller came her steady voice. I thought you should know Marcus Carter's hearing has been scheduled for next Thursday. We'll likely push for a full trial given the evidence. Ethan leaned back, rubbing his forehead. Is he still denying everything, every word Navarro said? But that's not why I called. We intercepted a letter from Marcus. It was intended for Lena. Ethan's jaw tightened. What did it say? Manipulation? Apologies laced with blame. He said she misunderstood his love. Classic grooming language. We've already submitted it into evidence. Ethan swallowed hard. Does she know? Not yet. We wanted your input first. Don't give it to her, he said. Not now. Not when she's just beginning to breathe. Agreed. He thanked her and ended the call, staring out the bedroom window as morning mist curled through the trees. He didn't know how long the fight would last. But what he did know, what he had no doubt about, was that Lena wouldn't face it alone. Later that morning, the kitchen was warm with the smell of pancakes and brewed coffee. Sophie stood at the stove in her pajamas, flipping a stubborn flapjack with practiced focus. Lena sat at the table sketching something in a notepad, her face bent in concentration. You sure I'm not burning these? Sophie asked, glancing at Ethan. You're within the legal limit, he teased. Lena looked up and smiled, small, genuine. Ethan crossed the room and set a hand on her shoulder. What are you drawing? She turned the notebook around. It was a house. Not their real one, but something brighter. There were two stick figures near the porch, one tall, one smaller. Between them was a little girl holding both hands. That's you and Sophie, she said. And me. He looked at her a moment, surprised by the emotion that rose, then nodded. Looks just right to me. That afternoon, a knock came at the door. Amelia Jacobs stood on the porch, bundled in a wool coat, a thin smile on her face. Hey, Ethan, can I come in? He stepped aside, eyebrows raised. I won't stay long, she said. I just came to give you this. She handed him a thin manila envelope. Inside were official-looking papers, CPS documentation approval for emergency foster care placement background check receipts. You've been cleared as Lena's temporary guardian. Ethan blinked. That was fast. You moved mountains for her, Amelia said. It's amazing what the system will do when someone refuses to give up. He glanced toward the living room, where Lena sat cross-legged with Sophie on the floor, giggling over a puzzle. I didn't do anything special, he said. Amelia shook her head. That's where you're wrong. Later, Lena stood with him outside by the garage, the late afternoon sun slipping behind the trees. He was fixing a belt on an old Civic while she passed him tools. They worked in easy silence, the kind only possible when trust has finally settled in. After a while, Lena spoke. I used to think I'd never trust another man again. Ethan didn't look up. He just nodded slowly. That would have been fair. But then you just kept showing up, she said. You didn't ask me to talk. You just let me be quiet. You made me feel not broken. He tightened the bolt, then set the wrench down. You were never broken, he said. You were scared. And you were surviving. That's not weakness, Lena. That's strength. She looked down, then said quietly, Marcus wasn't my dad. Ethan turned to face her fully. But you are. It landed in his chest like a soft impact, unexpected and life-altering. For a moment he couldn't find words. He just reached out, and she stepped into the hug, folding against him like she'd done it 100 times. I don't know what being a dad to two girls is supposed to look like. He said, his voice thick. But I'll figure it out. I promise. She smiled against his shoulder. You already are. That night, Ethan stood in the doorway of their shared room, watching Sophie and Lena sleep. Sophie sprawled across one half of the bed, an arm flung dramatically over her stuffed elephant. Lena was curled smaller hands, tucked beneath her chin, but peaceful now. No flinching, no tension in her brow. He'd never set out to be a hero. He was just a mechanic, a father, a man who noticed what others didn't, a man who listened when someone needed him to. But in a world that often failed to protect the quiet ones, that was more than enough. He stepped back, closed the door gently, and whispered into the still hallway, "I've got you. Both of you." And in that quiet promise, a new kind of family took root, not perfect, not planned, but real. And healing. The corner of Maple and 3rd looked different now. The rusted signpost had been replaced, the sidewalk patched with fresh concrete. Someone, likely the neighborhood committee, had planted a small flower bed beneath the bench daffodils beginning to stretch toward the spring air. Even the school bus seemed brighter as it rounded the bend, its windows glinting in the morning light. Ethan stood beside his old Chevy Arms, folded, the warmth of the sun resting lightly on his shoulders. It was the same stop where everything had started. The same stop where a girl once stepped off the bus with red-rimmed eyes and a heart full of silence. But today, everything had changed. The doors hissed open and 2 girls stepped out. Sophie bounded down first, her hair in a messy braid and her backpack bouncing against her side. "We have a field trip next week," she shouted as she ran toward Ethan. "Museum fossils." "You'll hate it." Ethan chuckled. "I'll pretend I'm thrilled." Then came Lena. She stepped down slowly, calmly. She didn't wear the oversized hoodie anymore. Today it was a jean jacket over a yellow t-shirt with a sun drawn on the front, Sophie's design. She walked with ease, with ownership of her space. She didn't look back. "Hey, Dad," she said, voice casual but deliberate. Ethan's heart pulled at the sound. "Hey, sweetheart," he replied. She didn't flinch at the word. She smiled. The girls climbed into the truck, arguing about whose turn it was to choose the radio station. Ethan watched them for a beat longer before rounding the hood and getting behind the wheel. That weekend, the 3 of them sat at the kitchen table coloring Easter eggs. It was a chaotic, messy affair, dye on the chair stickers and Sophie's hair-cracked shells that no one admitted to causing. "I think this one looks like you," Sophie said, holding up a wildly pink egg with googly eyes. Lena snorted. "That egg looks like it hasn't slept in 4 days. "Exactly." Ethan leaned back in his chair, just watching, soaking in the sound of laughter and the smell of vinegar and food, coloring the sense of home. Not just shelter, not just shared rooms or meals, but home, built from trust, stitched together with quiet moments like this. 2 weeks later, the final court hearing arrived. It was shorter than expected. Marcus Carter, now facing criminal charges for endangerment and abuse, had withdrawn his claim to custody. His attorney cited mounting evidence and emotional instability. The judge granted full emergency guardianship to Ethan pending formal adoption procedures. When the gavel fell, Ethan didn't cheer. He simply turned to Lena. "You okay?" She looked at him, her eyes clear, her voice steady. "Yeah, I really am." Months passed. Summer approached, and with it, the sense of permanence. Lena's room transformed from borrowed to lived in. Posters lined the walls, a bookshelf overflowed with sketch pads. She and Sophie took turns baking monstrosities in the kitchen, cookies that burned on the outside and stayed doughy in the middle. And every evening, Ethan sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and listened to them from inside, 2 voices tangled in laughter or debate or music. He never needed the television anymore. That was the sound of healing. One night, Lena joined him. Guess what he looked over? What she handed him, an envelope? Inside was a pencil sketch, detailed, careful, full of emotion. It was of the 3 of them at the bus stop. Ethan arms cross Sophie with her usual flair, and Lena eyes forward, a smile half-formed. A golden retriever sat beside them, imaginary but hopeful. He couldn't speak. "There's a contest at school," she said. "Theme is what family means. I think I want to enter. You'll win," he said. She grinned. "Nah, but that's okay." They sat in silence a while, the porch light buzzing above them, the night air warm and full of cricket songs. "I used to think family was something you're born into," Lena said at last. "But now I think it's more like a place where someone keeps the porch light on, just in case you ever want to come home." Ethan knotted his throat tight. "I'll always keep it on." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I know." One morning, months later, Ethan returned to the corner of Maple and 3rd, not out of habit, but for a purpose. He stepped out of the truck and stood there for a while, just watching, just remembering. A little girl once cried in silence here. And now she laughed in the kitchen, teased her sister, filled a home with drawings and warmth. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny engraved plate. He walked over to the bench, the same one he'd waited at every afternoon, and screwed the plate into the backrest. It read, "For the ones who just needed to be seen." Someone did. He stepped back and took a breath. Some stories don't end with thunder. Some end with the quiet arrival of light, slow, certain, and steady. And in the warmth of that light, even the most wounded souls remember how to grow. Even the silent ones remember how to speak. Even the forgotten learn they were never truly alone. And sometimes, the man who stood watching from the edge becomes the reason someone dares to walk back into the world again. Not as a victim, but as a daughter. Certainly, here's a warm, audience-friendly call to engagement section in English, perfectly suited for placing after the story ends. If this story moved you in any way, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. We always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another heartfelt tale. We share stories that remind us of the quiet strength in everyday people and the power of compassion. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, take care and be kind.